I got called to landscape a garden in the middle of December. I got the request in the middle of December. I'm looking for someone to landscape my garden. Growing too feeble to do it. Do you have any availability? I've worked in horticulture for nearly 2 decades. No one has ever asked me to do landscaping in the middle of December. We don't live up north where snow covers the ground half the winter, but it's cold enough that nothing grows, either. But after a lengthy call with the woman, Dawn was her name, she explained to me that she had a special garden, with carefully selected plants that grew straight through winter. So I packed up my truck and drove over to her house. As I parked on the curb next to the shriveled brown grass, my doubts came back. You know, I bet it's a prank. Like the horticultural version of calling in to a pizza place and ordering a weird pie. I wouldn't be surprised if Mike and James were behind it, to be honest. They were always screwing with me. But I stepped out of my truck and made my way to the front door. Curiously, I found a note taped to the wood in the garden out back. Meet me there. I made my way to the rear of the house, keeping my ears pricked from the sound of a trigger-happy dog or an annoyed husband. But as I rounded the brick structure, all I saw was the garden. Well, I'll be damned, I muttered under my breath. The grass in the backyard was a brilliant green, as if it were the middle of June. An obvious demarcation line lay between the brown and green, so clean and straight that it couldn't be as simple as a fertilizer or a different breed of grass. There was something seriously odd going on here. In the grass stood half a dozen trees. Each was incredibly beautiful, a few gnarled apple trees, and a few weeping willows. They all had a full array of leaves, despite the chilly weather. I opened the iron gate and stepped inside the garden. The soil immediately depressed under my feet, like some sort of memory foam. The chirping of birds, the sounds of cars rolling by, it all seemed to hush to peaceful silence the moment I stepped inside. That's when I realized the trees weren't just apple and willow trees. They couldn't be. Strange peach-colored fruit the size of tennis balls hung from the apple trees, and the willows bore deep purple flowers that were white in the center, like morning glories. Strange peach-colored fruit the size of tennis balls hung from the apple trees, and the willows bore deep purple flowers that were white in the center, like morning glories. As I stared at the trees, a velvety voice came from behind me. "You found me." I whipped around. "Dawn?" I asked, confused. She nodded. When she said she was growing feeble, I expected a 90-year-old woman. But instead, a young woman, maybe late 20s or early 30s, stood behind me. She was incredibly beautiful. Supernaturally beautiful. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who's easily stunned by women. I'm almost 50 years old, I got 2 kids at home, and I'm usually just too damn preoccupied to gawk at every woman who walks by, you know. But this woman, she looked like she'd just stepped out of a Photoshop magazine cover. Flawless, ivory skin. Blonde hair in soft waves that reached her waist. A perfect smattering of freckles, and a knowing smile. "Do you like my garden?" she asked. I tore my eyes away from her, feeling the heat rising to my face. Yes. It's beautiful. How do you keep it alive in this weather?" Even then, the wind carried a hefty chill. I guessed it was 45 degrees or so. "I have my ways," she said cryptically. Now that the wind was blowing in my face, I could smell something. A sweet nectar-like smell, seeming to come from deep within the garden. "What kinds of trees are these?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Well, sort of, yes. Some trees shouldn't be pruned as often, some should be cut only at the bottom. Use your judgment. I trust you." With that, she walked to the back of the garden. I watched her go, her dress swishing against her body. She sat down at a stone bench next to a pond near the back. I got to work with a smile on my face. Because this was exciting. When you get to be my age, life starts to feel a little like Groundhog Day. You get up, go to work, where you do the same crap you've done for the past 2 or 3 decades, and then you go home. Your teenage daughters give you angst, your wife nags you, you eat a lousy dinner. Then you try to have sex with your wife, she refuses, and it's time for sleep. Sleep is the most exciting part, really. So, seeing such a strange garden and a beautiful woman was an exciting change from the usual dreary cycle of life. I pulled out my gardening shears and walked over to the first tree, one of the willow-like ones on the left. Where should I start? Unlike normal trees, which naturally have bits of dead branches, this one seemed perfect. The willowy fronds swayed in the gentle wind, the teardrop-shaped leaves fluttering. Each was perfectly green. I brought my shears to the longest frond and snipped the last few inches off. The branch fell to the ground, and I stooped to pick it up. What the hell? It was dead. The leaves, which were green seconds ago, were withered and brown. As my fingers touched them, they made a crackly sound, as if they'd been dried for weeks. Curious, I raised the shears to another branch. This time, I watched closely, never taking my eyes off it for a second. Asterisk snip, asterisk, the leaves withered and curled in on themselves, as if pulled by some unseen force. Brown shot out from the base, quickly veining across each leaf. And then it was dead. Fear pounded through me. What the hell is going on? I turned around and glanced behind me at Dawn. She was staring into the pond. I walked over to her. What type of tree is that? I said, almost accusingly. She slid over on the bench, as if inviting me to sit down. I remained standing. It's an heirloom variety, passed down from generation to generation in my family. But a variety of what? They're all cultivars of the apple tree. I glanced at them skeptically. A few had the knobby, gnarled branches of apple trees, but the willowy ones didn't resemble them at all. And none of the fruit remotely resembled apples. When I cut them, they shrivel and die. That's not normal. This isn't a normal garden, she replied coolly. What, are you using some sort of illegal fertilizer or something? Or is it built over a hot spring? What is it? The curiosity almost outweighed the fear. In all my life, I'd never seen a garden like this. I wanted to know. Needed to know. Nothing like that. Then her tone turned cold. You should get back to work, David. These trees need to be taken care of, and that's what I'm paying you for. I swallowed and stepped over to one of the apple varieties. Clusters of the strange fruit clung to its branches, and I found myself staring. I'd never seen anything like that fruit. It was oblong, with a bubbled bottom that resembled an apple's. Despite the peachy color, it bore no fuzz, yet the skin was matte and smooth. Before I could stop myself, my hand shot up, reaching towards the fruit. On an impulse, I grabbed one and plucked it from its branch. It didn't wither away and die. Instead, the world tilted before me, as if I was suddenly dizzy. My body swayed and pitched. What the hell? I muttered to myself, but my thoughts were no longer clear. They were murky and muddled, like when you're about to faint or fall asleep. As I stood there, holding the fruit, completely disoriented, a figure ran by me. She was fast, but I still recognized her dark curls, her tall figure. It was my wife. She disappeared behind one of the trees, her soft giggles ringing out in the garden. The image blurred and shifted before me, the colors unnaturally bright, as if someone had somehow shifted the saturation up. I took a wobbly step towards her. Marie. Her face poked out from behind the bark for a second, then disappeared. But I realized she was young. In fact, she looked exactly how she did at 18 when we met. Back when she let her curls grow down her back, and her dark eyes were wide and innocent. Back when the smile never left her face. Back when I looked at her like she was the most amazing thing in the world. I took a step towards her, gripping the fruit in my palm. "Marie," I called again. Giggles echoed throughout the garden. "Marie." Her face poked out again, and I froze. Her face was horribly disfigured. 2 gaping black holes sat where her eyes should have been. Her flesh hung loosely on her face, and it buckled and roiled as if something wriggled underneath. As if 1,000 tiny insects made her body their home. My fingers released. The fruit dropped to the ground. Instantly, the ground steadied, the color desaturated, and everything shifted back to normal. Blinking, heart pounding, I found myself standing several feet away from Dawn. "Everything okay?" she asked innocently. I glanced back at the trees. They looked like they had minutes before, bright green leaves gently swaying in the breeze. I looked down at the grass. The fruit was at my feet. Except now, it was deflated and rotten, muddy brown instead of peach. A foul smell filled the air, and a conga line of ants danced out of the hole in its side. "I know. What is going on here?" I demanded, taking a step towards her. Surprisingly, she didn't take offense. Instead, she stood up, her mouth curling into a smirk. "You haven't figured it out yet." The possibilities ran through my head, fueled by 50 years' worth of cheap science fiction. Government psychological experiment. Hallucinogenic drugs produced by fruit. Trees from alien worlds, planted right here on Earth. This is some kind of experiment, isn't it? She shook her head. Without a word, she curled her fingers, motioning me to follow her. Hesitantly, I did, until I was standing before the pond. "Look," she said, pointing down. I glanced into the pond. And froze. My reflection stared back up at me. But I barely recognized it. Because it was a young, smooth face, with not a gray hair on its head. I lifted a trembling hand to my skin. It was smooth to the touch. The creases at the corners of my eyes, my mouth, were gone. What the hell is happening?" I asked. I now noticed even my voice sounded young, smooth, and higher pitched than usual. "What is this place? Don't you already know?" I shot up and wheeled around. The iron fence surrounding the garden climbed high towards the sky, as if it were alive. The trees shook, despite the still air, and the fruit swung on the branches. "I can give you what you want," she whispered. "Take you back to your teenage years. Before life became boring. While you and your wife were a young, happy couple, with not a care in the world." "What are you talking about?" Exclamation mark. "I mean it. Youth, granted, for nothing in return. But what about my daughters?" I finally choked out. "Oh, David," she said, shaking her head. "What do they matter when you could have eternal paradise?" I shook my head. No. Take me back. I don't want to be young. I want to be exactly how I am. It's too late for that." I turned on my heel and ran. A low hiss sounded behind me. I whipped around. Dawn no longer sat on the bench. In her place was an immense, green serpent winding its way across the stone. It slithered into the grass and disappeared. I ran faster. I ran towards the gate, which was now several feet higher than my head. The grass twitched to my right, and the hissing grew louder, but my hands fell upon the cold iron before she reached me. Then I yanked the door open. Immediately, the hissing stopped. Instead, I heard the rumble of an engine as a car drove by, and the faint chirping of birds overhead. Heart pounding, I turned around. But all that lay beyond the gate was an abandoned, overgrown brown lawn, attached to what appeared to be an abandoned house. I got in my van and peeled out of there. But first, I took a glance in the rearview mirror. My heart soared. All my wrinkles were back. I looked like the same old bag of crap that arrived. When I got home, I threw open the door with new energy. I hugged my wife, hugged my daughters, and spent all evening hanging out with them. something I hadn't done in months, too preoccupied with the drudgery of daily life. This was where I belonged. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more Reddit content.